Hello, Nick Leifker here, and welcome to the final video for GMGT 590 Operations Management. Well, we've talked a lot about supply chains, how they work, how they operate. Well, we have this issue of people working together in the supply chain versus acting independently in the supply chain. Well, what can happen when people act independently? Well, strange things, just massively strange things. For instance, we're going to look at a nice little case when people act independently and end up a lot worse as a result. For instance, suppose we have two burglars, Al and Bob. They're captured near the scene of a burglary and they're questioned separately by the police. Now, each of these two burglars has one of two options. They can either squeal on their partner or they can stay silent. So if neither man squeals, if both of them stay silent, well, they'll both serve 2 years on a concealed weapon charge. They have them on this little charge here. They can get them on that. If each squeals and implicates the other, if they both say the other person did it, both will go to jail for 4 years for burglary. However, suppose one burglar squeals, one burglar goes state's evidence, while the other one stays silent. Well, the person who's testifying, who confessed, they'll go free, while the other burglar will go to prison for 12 years on the maximum charge. So here's the question. What are Al and Bob going to do? So, if they both squeal, they both go to jail for 4 years. If Bob doesn't squeal, but Al squeals, well, Bob goes to jail for 12 years and Al goes free. The same way, if Bob squeals, but Al doesn't squeal, well, Bob will go scot-free while Al will go to jail for 12 years. And if both of them stay silent, they both go to jail for only 2 years. So here's the question. What are they going to do? Well, let's take a look at it from Al's perspective. If Bob confesses, what's the best thing that Al could do? Well, if Bob confesses, the best thing that Al could do is to confess. Because if he doesn't, he's going to jail for 12 years. This is not fun. Now, suppose Bob doesn't confess. Suppose Al knows that Bob is a loyal, trustworthy friend. So, if Bob doesn't confess, what's the best thing that Al can do? Confess. Because then, if Bob doesn't confess, and Al does confess, he gets off scot-free. On the other hand, if he stays silent as well, he ends up going to jail for 2 years. So, regardless of what Bob does, the best thing for Al to do is to confess. And if we look at it from Bob's perspective, it's the same thing. No matter what Al does, the best thing for Bob to do is to confess. So, both burglars will squeal and implicate the other. Now, it's important to note something here. If they both worked together, if they both had stayed silent, they both would have received only 2 years. But because it wasn't optimal for either of them to do so, they both squealed. If they worked together, they could have only had 2 years, but because it was optimal for them both to do so, not knowing what the other would do, they both squealed and both end up going to jail for 4 years. So, how could it have been different? Well, suppose Bob and Al belong to a nice family organization. Yes, a nice family organization, complete with Godfather. And within this organization, there are certain contracts and certain rules regarding conduct. And one of those rules is, well, those who squeal usually end up being fitted for concrete galoshes. What happens then? Well, then both Al and Bob have incentive not to squeal, to stay silent. So there's incentive within this contract, if you will, to collaborate. So, within your supply chains, you need to have some clauses, some parts of it within that working relationship that encourage collaboration, that would therefore maximize the overall profit of the entire supply chain and keep individual companies within the supply chain from simply acting in their own best interests, which in the end, as we've seen, can produce suboptimal results. Okay, well, you have exams coming up, you have a project coming up. Good luck, be well, take care.